Hello, dear friends. Today we continue our look at the diary of a German corporal. Don't forget to like the video and leave your thoughts on this content. Well, let's get started. September 15th, 1941. This time, the relief is taking place without any rush, and the weather is just perfect. Everyone is in good spirits, not a single frown. Word has gotten out. The attack will begin tomorrow. We've already grown to hate the city, just a stone's throw away from where we stand, yet we're not allowed to enter it. But just you wait, Kyiv, you proud city bristling with weapons. Everything will change soon. We're burning with impatience to launch the assault. Too much has been done for this over the past 3 days. Heavy howitzers and long-range guns are being positioned. They're hastily camouflaged with netting, and shells are being stacked. Lots of shells. I've never seen so many shells stacked up like firewood before. In the afternoon, we reach Vasilkiv. Then the first thing we do is celebrate and have a drink. After that, we spruce ourselves up a bit. We shave and wash our faces. But mostly, we're waiting for the order to attack. September 16th. The attack begins at 5 in the morning. The main thing now is to find a suitable spot for the general offensive. A patrol sent to Hotna, the very same Hotna where we suffered such heavy losses a month and a half ago, brings back important intelligence. Apparently, the Russians have abandoned their forward positions. Maybe they decided to retreat to more fortified ones? We capture Hotna as a result of a daring and swift operation. By the afternoon, we are already in Puchtoy and back in our former positions. And we have fulfilled our task of preparing for the general offensive. We dig in, which clearly won't hurt, because as soon as we finished, the Russians opened fire again. We returned fire. 100 guns are firing until it gets dark and the targets are still visible. Only a few large-caliber guns are being withdrawn from the positions. September 17th. We are still holding our positions ahead of the impending assault. The neighboring division is advancing at a very moderate pace. Despite the artillery fire, we, seasoned frontline veterans, even managed to catch a few winks. Experience and intuition tell us that the Russians are more concerned with defense right now and won't launch an attack. Suddenly, around noon, Budyonny's birds arrive. But the situation is no longer the same as it was last time in Teremki. 88mm and 20mm anti-aircraft guns repel the air attack with a barrage of fire. What happens next is simply amazing. The Bolsheviks messed up big time twice. Our anti-aircraft guns didn't fire a single shot. Wonderful! The Russians, who never spotted our camouflaged anti-aircraft guns, were circling as if they were over their own airfield. Counting on causing some damage and returning in full force, just like in the good old days back in August. And then it began. Our 20mm anti-aircraft guns opened fire. 18 Martins burst into flames like candles and crashed to the ground. The whole thing lasted 20 minutes. Take that, Budyonny. September 18th. Over the past 24 hours, our 210mm and 305mm guns subjected the Russian defensive line in the suburbs of Kyiv to intense shelling. This was followed by several attacks by our dive bombers. A few hours later, black clouds from the fires hung over Kyiv. A job well done. According to orders, the city's populated suburbs were off-limits for attack. Targets included the fortress, railway stations, ammunition depots, and bridges across the Dnieper. The order to storm the city came in the afternoon. The operation begins tomorrow. Guys, dig mass graves. You can vent all your hatred toward the city that has been right under your noses all this time and yet remained out of reach. But tomorrow, it will be captured. Finally, it will be. September 23rd. Fierce battles are raging in our rear. Since the morning of September 19, we have managed to break through the heavily fortified outer defense ring of the city. The enemy, as it turned out, was not as numerous or strong as we had assumed. It suffered a crushing defeat in bloody battles that often turned into hand-to-hand combat, and by 9 o'clock in the morning we had reached the western part of the city. The Russians no longer engaged in heavy street fighting. Our numerous advancing units and formations attacked the citadel from the direction of the Saya Gora, and by 11 o'clock our flags bearing the swastika were flying everywhere. By noon, we had reached the city center. Not a single shot fired. The wide streets and squares were completely deserted. A strange and eerie sight. The silence unsettles us. It is hard to believe that such a huge city has fallen into our hands in such a short time. Or is this a military ruse by the Russians? An attempt to lure us into a booby-trapped trap? Perhaps we are now standing on the rim of a volcano, ready to erupt at any moment. It was precisely these questions that kept everyone on edge. Now we have the answers. In order to lure the troops out of the city, troops that had to be kept out of combat by any means necessary, on September 17th, the German command simulated an attack east of Kyiv, carrying out a thorough artillery barrage. Budyonny immediately issued an order to launch a crushing counterattack against us, thereby withdrawing his troops from well-fortified defensive positions and, consequently, exposing the approaches to the city. About 120 kilometers east of the Germans' rather thin line of defense, in the area of the feint operation, the army that intended to outflank the enemy took up position. Intoxicated by such an easy victory, they had encountered no resistance at all. Budyonny's troops continued to pursue the retreating Germans. They retreated further and further east, and by September 19th were already very far from Kyiv. At that moment, the fate of several 100,000 of Budyonny's soldiers was sealed. They found themselves surrounded. Such is the irony of fate. Budyonny, who had never doubted victory until the very end, was convinced that he was pursuing a panicked, retreating enemy. Yet this enemy had mysteriously vanished overnight. A minor skirmish occurred on only one of the corps' flanks. But despite this, the Red commander decided that he had cut the enemy group to pieces. Most likely, terrible communication played a fatal role. What, then, was the notorious western line of defense on which Budyonny had pinned his hopes, just as the French had once done with the Maginot Line? It was not an ordinary chain of pillboxes. No, it was a collection of diabolical resources, the result of an idea that could have originated only in a mentally unstable mind. I will try to describe these eerie dead zones that we passed through during the battles on the 17th, 18th, and 19th. Behind Gatineau lie the fields of the cooperatives, vast vegetable fields. They just lie there under the sun. Who would ever think that high-voltage wires run through these harmless vegetable beds? Above the vegetables is a dense mesh of barbed wire stretching for several kilometers. There are also tall, insulated metal poles painted green. In short, a deadly high-voltage network fed from a bunker. It is so skillfully camouflaged that we only discovered it after losing several of our comrades. And then there were the devilish pits, deep and arranged in a row several 100 meters long. All of them are mined, and in a special way. When one mine is detonated, all the others, connected underground by special detonation channels, go off as well. Water pipes explode simultaneously with the mines, and within a few minutes, the entire area is flooded. This also includes wire that has been discreetly strung up, which also triggers the mines. Trip over it, and that's it. And the mines are about 75 centimeters tall, and upon explosion, spray a burning, oily liquid. It's also worth mentioning the sharp stakes, the tips of which are coated with a potent poison. Get scratched, and 10 minutes later, you die a painful death. All of the devices listed are equipped with pressure-activated automatic flamethrowers. Just imagine, amidst all these terrifyingly ingenious contraptions are also conventional types of weaponry. Two-tiered pillboxes, posts with automatic machine guns mounted on them, anti-tank trenches, and mined paths. Add to that anti-personnel mines, booby traps, cluster mines, and other types of mines. And just imagine how all this devilry functions in combat conditions. This is how the Russians decided to defend themselves against our attacks. The first stage, fire from conventional weapons, tanks, artillery, machine guns, and so on. Then comes the artillery of pillboxes, field guns, long-range guns, heavy artillery, and finally, guns mounted on railway platforms, and the heavy howitzers of the Kyiv fortress. As for infantry combat, here we relied on machine gun, rifle, and submachine gun fire, on all kinds of grenades, on bottles filled with incendiary mixtures, on dogs rigged with explosives, and on much more. One could go on at length listing all these ingenious inventions of the Bolsheviks. However, we were already partially familiar with them from the Western Front. As for incendiary grenades, they have nothing in common with ordinary ones. On the outside, it looks no different from a regular one, except that it has a phosphorus container at the bottom. When the phosphorus ignites, it explodes, scattering a multitude of shrapnel fragments. There is no point in accusing anyone who has seen the wounds caused by these fragments of inhumanity toward the enemy. All this filth should have been banned by the Geneva Convention long ago, but would those Red Russian pigs ever agree to that? Bottles filled with an incendiary mixture, or, as they are also called, Molotov cocktails, are used similarly to hand grenades in trench combat. Effect: upon impact, the bottle shatters. The liquid inside ignites upon contact with air, reaching temperatures of 800 to 1,000 degrees Celsius, producing massive amounts of white smoke. Imagine if one of these things landed on your uniform. With certain additional devices, it is possible to fire these bottles like projectiles. Approximate range: up to 200 meters. By the way, the Russians have also mastered firing limonkas from artillery. Mine-carrying dogs. We shot a dozen of these dogs, mostly German shepherds, in Giuliani. A backpack containing a charge weighing about 3 kilograms is strapped to the animal's back. According to one Russian who trained these dogs, they are intended to combat enemy tanks. The detonator is triggered by a thin wooden slat positioned vertically at a slight angle. They are usually trained by feeding them only under tanks, so the animals get used to the tanks and crawl under them, hitting the detonator's trigger mechanism with the slat. From other sources, I have heard that the dogs are also taught to attack infantrymen on the march. In many sections of the postal road, the Russians used aerial mines. These mines are equipped with wings and a propeller. The mine is attached to a red balloon with a diameter of 1 meter. Upon landing, the balloon immediately detaches. After such a mine explodes, a very deep crater remains. What I am describing here is only a tiny fraction of the whole. After all, what is this compared to the other actions of this Kiev group, about which very little is known? It was assumed that all public buildings in the city were heavily mined. Just 2 days after we took control of the city, 3 barracks suddenly exploded, one of which was occupied by German soldiers. And from that day on, explosions rang out in the city almost every hour. Something was bound to go up in the air. Factories, warehouses, hospitals, schools. All of them first blown up and later destroyed by fire. The local population began to come out onto the streets and show the first signs of trust in us. Among the Ukrainians, I met many very kind people. Touching scenes played out on the streets. Sometimes, as soon as a group of our soldiers appeared somewhere in the city, local residents would immediately surround us, smile at us, and often even cry with joy and hug us. Some tried to say something in broken German, and that is how we learned of countless shattered lives. They were grateful to us for every piece of bread. Many hadn't eaten for several days. By noon, there were already as many people on the streets as on a normal, peaceful day. Cars were rolling down the roads toward the east. Convoys of military supply vehicles, trucks, fuel tankers were moving through. Kyiv had never seen such heavy traffic. All the sidewalks were filled with onlookers. Suddenly, something indescribable happened. A terrible explosion in 3 places along the main street at once. Flames shot higher than the buildings. Chunks of stone and metal beams from the ceilings flew into the air. The streets filled with acrid smoke and the smell of burning. People scattered, screaming in terror. Some were trampled by the panicking crowd. People tried to press themselves against the walls of the buildings. With weapons in hand, we tried to somehow calm the panicked crowd. What had happened? When the smoke cleared, we saw the terrible aftermath. A wide street, about 100 meters long, had been devastated. Where the Lenin monument had stood just moments before, a massive crater, like a volcanic crater, gaped open. The walls of 4-story buildings on both sides of the roadway had collapsed. Dozens of people were trapped under the rubble. So much for peaceful serenity. A few hours later, 2 divisions that hadn't yet recovered from the fighting were ordered to urgently form special units. One was instructed to survey the city according to the existing plan, hastily abandoned by the retreating Red Army units. The task was set to clear the city of dangerous elements and terrorist groups. The order was passed from unit to unit, from one detachment to another. Assault sappers immediately began searching for mines planted in buildings. The special units of the secret field police and the SS acted with particular efficiency. In the second half of that same day, they began identifying Jews. More details on this will be provided below. The investigation revealed 2 things. First, a remote-controlled detonator had been installed in the Lenin monument. Second, several more explosive devices of a similar type were discovered in the city center. Despite the measures taken, not much else was discovered. Most likely, the building of the Museum of Ukraine had also been mined. We spent the entire evening searching this monumental structure. Although the rooms were pleasantly cool, we were drenched in sweat from exhaustion. No wonder. Just try running through a huge building where death lurks at every turn. Finally, in one of the tiny basement rooms, we heard the ticking of a clock. The sound was coming from behind the wall. No wires or additional devices, nothing at all. We spent another half-hour searching, it felt like an eternity to us, to find that infernal device. And then we ordered everyone to evacuate the building immediately. All nearby buildings were evacuated and secured accordingly. At exactly 10 o'clock in the evening, that massive building exploded. 5 or 6 city blocks were completely burned to the ground overnight. And this wasn't the only place. In several areas of Kyiv, raging flames shot up to the sky. Explosions thundered, fires raged, and the sky above the city was painted crimson. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. Bye for now, everyone. See you next time.